Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today is a very exciting video because I am going to be talking about my full in-depth review of Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. If you have not read this book, do not continue any further unless you like to be spoiled because this review does contain many spoilers. Only proceed with this video if you have read this book, if you want to talk about this book, if you have random thoughts about this book, or if you haven't read the book but you like to be spoiled because you're a bit of a weirdo. No judgment here. If you haven't read this book but you want to hear my thoughts on it on a non-spoiler kind of way, go ahead and check out the last video that I posted. It is a non-spoiler review of my opinions of this book. Without further ado, let's get started. This is Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. Alice Feeney has written a few other books. Her other most popular book is called Rock, Paper, Scissors. I have not read any of her other books. This is my first Alice Feeney book. She typically writes in the thriller suspense genre. This book out on January 14th. I received it early through Book of the Month, so that's why I've already read it. He's phone with his wife, Abby, as she's driving home from work. All of a sudden, she slams on her brakes, gets out of the car, and Grady never hears from her again. He later finds her abandoned car on the side of the road. Her purse is there, her keys are there, and her phone is there, but she's nowhere to be found. A year goes by, and Grady is still grieving his missing wife. His job is an author. He is a best-selling author, actually, but he hasn't been able to write anything since the night of her disappearance. So he escapes to a remote Scottish island where he hopes to find some peace and quiet and finally write his next book. But while he's there, a lot of really weird and eerie things start happening. For instance, someone keeps leaving articles that were written by Abby. She was an investigative journalist, and her articles keep appearing in his cabin when he's not home. Another instance is that he finds the remains of a human hand underneath the floorboards of his cabin. He hears creepy harmonica music playing in the forest near his cabin when there's not supposed to be anybody around. He is constantly seeing or thinking he's seeing his missing wife. She keeps appearing out of the corner of his eye, but when he goes to investigate, it's not her or she's nowhere to be found. He thinks he's going crazy. Then while driving back to his cabin one day, he suddenly gets hit by heavy fog and he accidentally hits someone with his car. He gets out to help the person that he hit and he sees that it is his missing wife or someone who looks exactly like her. The only problem is she doesn't seem to have any idea who he is. Turns out her name is Audrey, not Abby. She lives on the island. She's married to somebody else. At this point, Grady's really confused. He was so sure this was Abby because it looks, talks, acts just like her, but it's not her. So he continues to think that he's going crazy. Fast forward through, honestly, a lot of unnecessary filler. Grady has become increasingly more paranoid about being on this island. The people who live on the island will not let Grady leave. So he comes up with a plan of escape. But before he's actually able to follow through on that plan, he is confronted by the islanders and, wouldn't you know it, Abby, his missing wife. She's been on the island the whole time. Shocker. She actually was Audrey and she was faking it. Like I didn't see that one coming. This is when we find out that Grady was an unreliable narrator. Turns out a year ago when Abby went missing, Grady thought that Abby was cheating on him. So he devised a plan to kill her. He knew when she would be driving home from work. He knew what road she'd be taking and he was there waiting for her. This psycho dressed up in one of her outfits, put on a wig, and laid in the road for her to find him. When she gets out of the car to help him, he grabs her and throws her off of a cliff. Somehow she survives being thrown off of a cliff and escapes back to her childhood home, the Scottish island that we are on now. The backstory of Abby's childhood home becomes even more crazy and unbelievable. So bear with me again. Turns out Abby grew up on this island. There used to be a lot more people who lived there except for one day. Abby is 9 years old and she's at home and her music teacher tries to take advantage of her. She escapes and runs to her school where her entire class of children decide to run away with her. They go to this local cave, are caught by high tide, and every single one of the children except for Abby dies. Then one of the mothers of the children decides to kill the music teacher. So of course, apparently the entire island is unable to trust men after that. So they slowly start getting rid of the men on the island. Except for one guy. One guy is still living on the island. He is a best-selling author and he decides to donate his entire income to the island's expenses. So he is literally keeping this island afloat financially. But that guy, he unalives himself. So now the island has no way of income except for some tourism, but they don't like tourists. So they go to Grady and say, hey, listen, we know what you've done. So you have two options. One, you could die, or two, you could write a best-selling book and donate all of your money to the finances of the island. Grady doesn't really like option one. He accepts. A year later, Grady is still on the island. He's written a best-selling novel and he seems happy, but his internal monologue says that he wants to get off the island. And that's it. That's the shortened version. That's the shortened summary. There are so many unnecessary things that happen in this book. I ended up giving this book a 2.75 out of 5 stars. It just didn't hit home for me. Promising premise, lackluster execution. It had lots of potential. It had so much potential, but it fell short. It really did. It just fell short. I was pretty interested throughout the book. I was like, okay, what's gonna happen? I couldn't figure out what's going on. I had a feeling that Grady was an unreliable narrator, but I didn't know how. So it did keep me reading. I finished this book in like a couple of days. The ending was so annoying. It was like the author was like, oh shoot, I promised to keep this book only 300 pages. Let me really quickly write an explanation for every single incident that happened throughout the book. There were so many unanswered questions. I did not like this book, honestly. I gave it a 2.75 out of 5 stars. And I wouldn't say I'm a tough grader, but to get to a 2 is kind of hard for me. When I initially read this book, right after I gave it a 3.75, I didn't love it, but I was like, all right, whatever. And then the more I thought about this book over the past few days, the angrier I became. There were so many unanswered questions. For example, all of those articles written by Abby that were ending up in Grady's cabin, those were there because the oldest woman on the island was leaving them there without anyone knowing. She's super old and apparently and supposedly immobile. How was she leaving her house, walking to Grady's cabin in the forest that's deep into the forest? Apparently you can't even drive to, you can only walk to. Breaking into his cabin when he's not home and then leaving the articles for him to find and then walking back completely unnoticed? It makes zero sense. Zero sense. Speaking of, halfway through the book, Grady starts driving a car left by the previous owner at the cabin. This car is in a garage on the property. But earlier in the book, they say that you can't drive a car up to the cabin. So how is Grady able to drive it up there? That doesn't make any sense. And then when he says, oh, how do I get the car off? The woman that he's talking to says, oh, through the trees. But she couldn't even drive her car up to his cabin. They had to walk. Makes zero sense. Zero sense. Completely. Why even have that in the story if it's just not going to make sense later? This one's super minor, so it might not be that big of a deal, but to me, it just annoyed me, is at one point Grady finishes his manuscript. He has written his book and he goes to the general store in order to have them order a printer because there's no printers on the island and there's no internet on the island. So he needs the general store to actually order it so he can have a printer and then print on the island. So we witnessed the entire conversation between him and the store owner on ordering this printer. A week later, the printer arrives, he prints it and then mails the manuscript to his agent. But in that initial conversation, he never asked for printering. He never asked for paper. I doubt the general store lady was like looking online, like a bundle that includes ink and paper with his printer. So speaking of, there's no internet on the island at all. So Grady would have had to have a plug that would manually plug in from his laptop to his printer and so he could print it because there's no internet. So he would have had to somehow manually be able to do that. I doubt that he showed up at the island with that. And we know he didn't order it because we witnessed the conversation between him and the lady about ordering the printer. It doesn't make sense. Also, never explained is that when Grady sees Abby, who is pretending to be Audrey, he takes a brochure from her store which has her picture on it. And later, he confronts Abby's wife on the island and confronts her with this picture of Abby, but when he looks at the brochure, it's a different person. But he literally confronted her the same day that he took the brochure. How would somebody have been able to go into his cabin, steal the brochure, print out a brand new one? How would they be able to go and quickly print it out and then replace the brochure the same day? This was the same day. He confronts her the same day that he takes the brochure. He confronts his wife. It doesn't make any sense. I realize that I'm sounding way too crazy right now, but it's just all these little things were adding up and I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, for something else that goes into my 2.75 rating is that I didn't really care for any of the characters. I didn't care about what happened to them. I cared about the general story. I was like, okay, this premise is interesting. I wonder how it's going to end or what's going to happen. But I just felt like the characters were so lacking in personality and who they were. Grady is just like this absent husband who is a novelist and he only likes his dog, Columbo, who by the way is the only character that I like, Columbo. He sounded really cute and he seemed like a very loyal pup. I didn't mind him being an unreliable narrator. I just felt like his internal dialogue didn't really make the most sense. He spoke a lot about how in love with his wife he was and how much he missed her. Yes, you can still have all that, and he's an unreliable narrator, but it just, the way that he was thinking about Abby and wondering if people were her, it didn't come off that she's not supposed to be alive because I killed her. It came off like, oh, I'm actually missing my wife. I'm grieving her. I don't know where she is. I hope she's alive. That's what it seemed like. I think even at one point he does say that he internally that he hopes that she's alive or that he knows she's alive or something like that. Abby, she was just boring. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because we didn't get much of her internal dialogue. I know that there was a few. It was mostly from Grady's perspective, and then a couple of times we got to see Abby's therapy sessions a week before she disappears. She was planning on leaving him. Obviously, their internal dialogues didn't match up. He's saying how in love with her he is and how they have the most perfect marriage. And then in her therapy session, she's saying, oh, I don't think he loves me anymore. I'm going to leave him. It didn't really, I understand what the author was trying to do. She was definitely working with a lot of red herrings. She was definitely trying to keep you on your toes and try to keep you guessing of like, okay, what's going to happen? This doesn't really make sense. There was also this whole side story, backstory, I'm not really sure, of like how Grady's agent turned out to also be named Abby. I didn't really understand this, to be honest. She turned out to also be named Abby. And so we were reading some of her thoughts as well. And she also raised Abby, which we kind of knew. She was her godmother. It was just like too many things had to fall in place for this story to happen. And I suppose that the message of this book was revenge, not message, but like the theme, I suppose the theme of this book was revenge. Revenge on Grady's part. He, thought Abby was cheating on him, and so he tries to kill her. And then revenge on the island's part for what Grady has done to Abby. The revenge from each like individual. Abby obviously is mad at Grady because of what he tried to do to her. And then, all of the islanders, they sought revenge on men, I guess, in general. It was very like anti-men. It turned out that this book was, I don't know if the book was anti-men, but the island turned out to be very anti-men. And it seemed like so unrealistic and so improbable the way that the story took place that, okay, like, we'll let you live on the island because we need money, because we hate tourists. The ending really ruins the book. I was actually into the book for like, I would say a good like 65% of it. And then it started to get really stupid. There was just too much going on in the book, and the book was so short that I felt like everything was happening so fast and there was too much going on for me to actually care about anybody in the book. I did like about this book is the descriptions of the setting. I felt like it was just so well described and so vivid, and I could really picture the island, and I loved the map that was at the beginning of the book. But yeah, I loved this map, the Isle of Amberley. Like it just was it really helped me to visualize the island. Every time he went to a new place, I was just so excited to like go back to the map and see where he was on the island. Like I loved it. I just thought it was so well thought out. And I love when an author does that, is when they really take time to create the world, build up the world, and just think really hard about the setting. This is a remote island off the coast of Scotland. It's very cold. It gets very foggy. There was just like a lot of like vivid imagery that Alice Feeney was using that I really appreciated. In fact, the island was almost a character of its own. I felt like the plot was really being driven forward by what was happening on the island, whether it was the island's weather or the people who lived on the island. There was a few plot developments made by Grady himself, but I think for the most part, it did feel like things were happening to Grady, whether it was the island or the people on the island. So I really appreciated that. The writing was really clear and easy to follow. It had a really good pace up until the end. I felt like for the 75% of the book, the pacing was great. I was like, okay, this is good. The chapters weren't too long. It was easy to get through. I kept me interested. Then the ending was just so rushed that I was just like this, the word stupid just kept coming to my mind over and over again as I was reading it, and more so now that I'm reviewing it and analyzing it. Just this whole plan, the whole book being because Grady tried to kill Ab, she devised this elaborate plan using a remote Scottish island and all of the people on it. It just seems so stupid and unrealistic, and it was just ultimately very unsatisfying. I would say this book in a nutshell, one word, unsatisfying. So 2.75 stars. I also do a tears and a spice rating. So for tears, I would say this is a 1 out of 5. Dry eyes. The story did not evoke any strong emotions or tears. There were some content warnings of the book for sure that I'll get to just in case you haven't read the book. For the most part, it wasn't, nothing was described enough for me to choke up or get any kind of teary eyes. The spice scale, a 1 out of 5, maybe a 1.5. That would be a bell pepper. There wasn't very many spicy scenes. There was I think there was 2 or 1.5, but the one that I'm thinking of, it just surprised me. So that's why I'm giving it a 1.5 out of 5 instead of a 1, because it did surprise. I wasn't expecting it, but it wasn't super descriptive or anything like that. It was pretty closed door. In terms of content warnings, there was mention of sexual assault, suicide, addiction, violence, and physical abuse, death, and murder. So that's my review of Alice Feeney's new novel. It just came out January 14th. So if this review didn't scare you, go ahead and pick it up. Some people might like it. I found it unsatisfying. If this review didn't scare you off, go ahead and pick it up. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've read this book, please go ahead and leave a house emoji in the comments, a house because of the cabin that Grady stayed in. I would love to hear your thoughts about this book. I really would love to debate this book. I don't know anyone else who has read it, of course, because it just came out. So I would like to know if you liked this book, if you thought it was just as stupid as I did or just as unsatisfying. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the ending, you are a true champion. I apologize for all of my ranting, but that's just how I feel about this book. I will for sure be reading more Alice Feeney. I don't like to, completely disregard an author just because I don't like one of their books. I usually read about 3 of their books, usually from different time periods as well, just so I can see if maybe I liked their writing style before or after, or if they've changed their writing style, or if they just change, or if they change genres, maybe I like a different genre written by them more. So I for sure will be reading Rock, Paper, Scissors. I don't know if I'll be reading it this year. Maybe I will, just so I can kind of keep Beautiful Ugly in mind as I read Rock, Paper, Scissors. Maybe that would be kind of more of a good comparison. But so thank you so much for watching. I will be posting more book reviews the rest of this year. It's my goal to post a book review for every single book I read this year. So I also post book hauls and TBR lists and all of the bookish things. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.